This is my stepsister, just a nurse. My sister said it the way you'd introduce a stain on a tablecloth, something to acknowledge before everyone politely ignores it. 120 guests at the Oakmont Country Club. Champagne flutes mid-air. My dad laughed first. Not a nervous laugh, a real one, the kind that tells you he agreed. I stood there in my $40 dress among women wearing Valentino, and I did what I've done my entire life. I swallowed it. But what my sister didn't know, what nobody at that table knew, was that the man sitting at the head table, the groom's father, the man writing the checks for this entire wedding, I had held his heart beating with my bare hands on a highway 3 years ago, and he was about to remember. Before I go on, if this story hits close to home, take a second to hit like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with what I'm sharing. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to know where you're listening from. My name is Shelby Ittner. I'm 29. I'm a trauma nurse. And this is the story of how my sister's cruelest moment became her biggest mistake. Now let me take you back to 3 weeks before the wedding, the day Victoria's invitation arrived in my mailbox. The invitation came on a Tuesday, wedged between a power bill and a catalog I never subscribed to. Cream-colored Crane and Company paper, letterpress, with a monogram stamped in gold. V and J, Victoria and James. I ran my thumb across the raised letters. My hands still smelled like chlorhexidine from the overnight shift. They'd spelled my name wrong. Shelley. No one in my family has ever bothered to learn the difference. There was no +1. I set the invitation on my kitchen counter next to a stack of trauma nursing journals and stared at it the way you'd stare at a summons. Because that's what it was. Not an invitation. A summons. Victoria didn't want me at her wedding. She wanted me accounted for. Growing up in my father's house was an exercise in becoming furniture. Robert married Diane when I was 9. Victoria was 12. From that first week, the architecture of the family shifted. Victoria's room had a canopy bed and a framed portrait Diane commissioned from a local artist. My room was the old study, repurposed with a cot and a lamp that flickered when the heater kicked on. Victoria's school photos climbed the staircase wall in matching frames. Mine sat in a drawer. Diane introduced Victoria to guests as our daughter. I was Robert's kid from before. And my father? He let it happen, every time. I called him every Sunday like clockwork. He'd pick up, say, "Hey, Shell," talk for 90 seconds, then, "I'll call you back." He never did. 3 months could pass without hearing his voice, and when I'd finally dial again, he'd answer like no time had gone by, like I wasn't someone worth keeping track of. So when Victoria's invitation arrived, my name misspelled, no guest, I almost threw it away. Almost. Then my phone rang, and it was him. "Victoria wants you there," my father said. His voice had that rehearsed warmth he only used when someone was listening. It'd mean a lot. I should have known. When my father calls, it's never for me. It's always for whatever Victoria needs. I looked up the Harringtons that night, sitting cross-legged on my apartment floor with my laptop balanced on a stack of pathophysiology textbooks. Richard Harrington, 63. Started as a construction laborer in his 20s, built a real estate development firm from a single duplex rehab into a company that had reshaped half the commercial corridor in Fairfield County. Self-made, the kind of man magazine profiles describe as unpretentious wealth. His son James was a corporate attorney, Georgetown Law, junior partner at a mid-size firm downtown, good-looking in that clean, careful way. Victoria had been dating James for 2 years, and in that time, she'd constructed an entire mythology around our family. I pieced it together from her Instagram, the account she'd never let me follow, but never bothered to make private. Curated photos of Sunday family brunch at restaurants I'd never been invited to. Robert in a blazer she'd picked out. Diane with fresh highlights. Candles on the table. The captions read like ad copy. "Nothing matters more than family." The comments were a chorus. Your family is goals. So blessed. One photo had 47 likes. I wasn't in a single frame. Robert managed an Ace Hardware in Milford. Victoria told the Harringtons he was in the hardware industry. Diane used to cater small neighborhood events, sheet cakes and chafing dishes. And Victoria had repackaged her as someone who ran her own catering company. Everything about our family was a renovation, new paint over rotten studs. I found out later, from James himself, that Victoria had given the Harringtons a specific instruction about me. I overheard her telling Diane on the phone the week before the brunch, "We need her there for the family photo. After that, keep her invisible." The word landed like a closed fist. Invisible. That had always been the assignment. Here's the thing about being invisible at home. You learn to become essential somewhere else. My shift at St. Luke's Regional started at 7 a.m. and didn't end until the board was clear, which usually meant 19 hours later. That particular week, the week before Victoria's pre-wedding brunch, I worked 4 back-to-back 12s, 3 codes, 1 pediatric trauma that I still think about when the department goes quiet, a 60-year-old man whose heart stopped in the waiting room. I had my hands on his chest before the crash cart rolled in, and he walked out 5 days later carrying flowers for his wife. No one at St. Luke's cared who my stepsister was marrying. They cared whether my IV lines were clean and my assessments were sharp. Dr. Ellen Marsh, the attending who ran our ER like a submarine captain, had nominated me for the Nursing Excellence Award the year before. I'd won. The plaque sat in my locker at work. I never brought it home. I never posted about it. I never told my family. The one time I tried, the one time I mentioned to Victoria that I'd been nominated for something, she'd tilted her head and smiled. "That's cute. Do they give real awards to nurses?" Diane had laughed from the kitchen. Robert had said nothing, so I stopped sharing. I let my work exist where it mattered, in patient charts, in discharge summaries, in the quiet nod from a surgeon who knew I'd caught something he'd missed. The biggest case of my career had happened 3 years earlier. An 18-wheeler jackknifed on I-95 during a rainstorm. Multiple vehicles. I was driving home from a double shift when I came on the wreckage. What happened in those 47 minutes on that highway changed everything. But I'll get to that. In the ER, nobody asks what your family thinks of you. They just need your hands to be steady. The pre-wedding brunch was held at the Harrington estate, a stone colonial on 4 acres with a circular drive and hedgerows trimmed so precisely they looked architectural. I parked my Honda Civic between a Porsche Cayenne and a Mercedes S-Class and sat in the car for 2 full minutes, hands on the wheel, telling myself this was just one afternoon. Inside, everything smelled like fresh-cut peonies and old money. Caterers moved through the rooms with silver trays. Victoria had positioned herself at the center of the living room, magnetic, laughing at something Margaret Harrington said, her hand resting on James's arm like she'd been born there. I needed the restroom. A caterer pointed me down a hallway, past what turned out to be Richard Harrington's study. The door was open. I didn't mean to stop, but the walls caught me. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a cherry wood desk with a decanter of something amber. Macallan, I'd later learn, the 18-year. Framed business awards lined the shelves, and in the center of them, given more prominence than any deal tombstone or industry plaque, was a photograph. A man in a hospital bed, oxygen tubing, bruises across his jaw. Beside the frame, a small card, handwritten, that read, "To the Angel, on I-95. Next to it, a clipped newspaper article from the Fairfield County Register. The headline, "Local businessman survives horrific highway crash, thanks to off-duty nurse." I looked at the photo. The man's face was swollen, half covered in gauze. I didn't recognize him. I process hundreds of patients a year, and 3 years is a long time. Faces blur, details dissolve. I glanced at the article but didn't read past the headline. Then Richard Harrington walked in behind me. "That's my 2nd birthday," he said, nodding at the photo. "The day someone gave me my life back." I smiled politely. "That's incredible." He looked at me. held the look a beat longer than comfortable. Then Margaret called him from down the hall, and the moment broke. Victoria appeared at my elbow. "Stop bothering Mr. Harrington," she hissed. "Come on." She pulled me away before I could say another word. The brunch introductions happened in the garden, under a pergola heavy with wisteria. Victoria moved through them like a press secretary, poised, efficient, every sentence polished to a shine. My mother, Diane, she ran her own catering business before she retired. Diane beamed. Richard nodded, impressed. My stepfather, Robert, he's been in the hardware industry for over 20 years. Robert straightened his borrowed blazer and shook Richard's hand too firmly. Then Victoria moved to the next cluster of guests without pausing. She skipped me entirely. I was standing 3 feet away, holding a glass of sparkling water, and she turned her body like I was a pillar. Margaret Harrington noticed. She extended her hand toward me. "And who's this?" Victoria's smile tightened, barely, the way a stitch pulls before it tears. "Oh, that's Shelby. She's around." Margaret looked at me with genuine curiosity. "What do you do, Shelby?" Before I could answer, Victoria leaned in. "She works at a hospital, in some capacity." I met Margaret's eyes. "I'm a registered nurse in the emergency department at St. Luke's Regional." Margaret's eyebrows lifted. "ER? That must be incredibly demanding." Victoria's hand landed on Margaret's arm, redirecting her like a rudder. "It is. Anyway, Margaret, I wanted to show you the floral mock-ups for the centerpieces. The florist did something absolutely gorgeous with the David Austin roses." And just like that, I was behind them again. Walking back through the house, Victoria fell into step beside Diane and whispered something I caught only in fragments. But one sentence landed whole. "She's already talking too much. Handle it." Diane glanced back at me, smiled, the kind of smile that isn't one. Diane found me near the rose garden, standing alone with my water glass, watching caterers clear the brunch trays. She approached the way she always did, softly, like a door closing so gently you don't notice you've been locked out. "Honey," she said, touching my arm, "can we talk for a sec?" She guided me to a stone bench at the far edge of the garden, well away from the other guests. The string lights hadn't been turned on yet. It was the kind of corner where you put things you want out of sight. "Victoria is under so much pressure," Diane said, her voice dripping with manufactured sympathy. "This wedding is everything to her. You understand that, right?" "What are you asking me to do, Diane?" She blinked, recalibrating. "Just be supportive. Be quiet. Don't make it about you." I'd heard this script before. At Thanksgiving, when Victoria announced her engagement, and I was told not to overshadow the moment by mentioning my nursing excellence nomination. At Robert's 60th birthday, when Diane suggested I pop in and pop out so the photographer could get just the immediate family. At my own college graduation, where Robert arrived late, checked his phone through the ceremony, and left before I crossed the stage because Diane had a migraine. I was always the thing to be managed, the variable to be controlled. "I hear you, Diane," I said, and I did. Every single word. I walked back inside and called my friend Priya from the hospital parking lot, sitting on the Civic's hood. "I don't know why I came," I told her. And then I heard it. Victoria's voice, carrying through an open window. She was on the phone with someone, and what she said next changed everything. "No, I told the Harringtons she has issues, emotional stuff. They won't ask questions." I sat there. I heard every word, and I felt something in my chest rearrange. Not break, shift, issues, emotional stuff. The words replayed in my head for the rest of that day. I drove home from the brunch with the windows down, air pushing at my face like it could strip the conversation from my skin. It didn't. 2 days later, the confirmation came by accident. I was at the rehearsal walkthrough, a quick session at the Oakmont Country Club to time the processional, and I'd stepped outside for air. James was on the patio, talking with his college friend, a groomsman named Tyler. They didn't see me around the corner. "Yeah," James said, casual, almost offhand. Victoria's stepsister has some personal issues. Victoria doesn't like to talk about it. It's sad. Tyler murmured something sympathetic. James continued. The family tries to keep it low-key. You know, supportive from a distance. Supportive from a distance. That was the phrase Victoria had packaged for public consumption. She hadn't just excluded me, she'd rewritten me. In the Harrington family's minds, I wasn't someone being pushed aside. I was someone gently quarantined, the kind, tragic stepsister with problems nobody wants to discuss at dinner. That night, I called my father. No preamble. Did you know Victoria told the Harringtons I have mental health issues? Silence. Then a sigh. The specific sigh Robert uses when he's been caught and wants to sound tired instead of guilty. She's just protecting the family image, Shelby. Don't make a scene. Protecting the family image from what? From me? You're twisting this. Did you go along with it? He didn't answer. Which was an answer. I looked at my father, at the man wearing the Alan Edmonds shoes Victoria had bought him, the suit Diane had picked, the talking points his stepdaughter had scripted, and I understood something I'd been avoiding for 20 years. He hadn't just let her erase me. He'd helped. The rehearsal dinner was the following Friday. The Oakmont Country Club. 120 guests. Crystal chandeliers that threw little rainbows across the ceiling. A live string quartet playing Debussy. Place cards in Hermès orange, hand calligraphed. The kind of event where even the napkin folds had a name. I arrived 20 minutes early because I didn't know what else to do with the anxiety. I wore a navy dress I'd found at Target for $39. Simple, clean lines. No jewelry except my mother's pearl earrings, 2 small, luminous studs that she'd worn every day until the cancer took her when I was 7. They were the only thing of hers I had left. The seating chart was mounted on an easel near the entrance, framed in gold. I found my name, misspelled again, at table 14. The last table, closest to the kitchen doors. I would be sitting with the babysitter, a distant colleague of Diane's, and an empty chair. Victoria had been thorough. I walked in alone. Women in Valentino and Cartier moved around me like water around a stone. Diane spotted me from across the room and made a quick scan, head to toe, 3 seconds flat. Then she leaned toward Victoria and murmured something. Victoria glanced over her shoulder, looked at me, and turned away. I read her lips. 2 words. She's fine. Meaning, she's plain enough not to cause problems. I sat at table 14, unfolded my napkin, looked at the menu. Chilean sea bass, roasted endive, creme brulee. Each entree probably cost more than what I made in 3 shifts. Victoria took the stage 20 minutes later, mic in hand, crystal encrusted, rented for the occasion. The room quieted, and then she began the introductions. I knew what was coming. What I didn't know was who was watching. Victoria started with Diane. My mother, the woman who taught me everything about grace and resilience. The room clapped. Diane pressed a hand to her chest like she'd just been crowned. Then Robert. My stepfather, Robert. The man who gave me a real family. Robert's eyes went glassy. He raised his glass. The room followed. Then her bridesmaids. Her college roommate. Her boss at the wedding planning firm. Each introduction was a small coronation, polished, warm, designed to impress the Harringtons sitting at the head table. And then she turned to table 14. And this, she paused. The pause was practiced. I knew it, because I knew Victoria, and she never left silence unscripted. This is my stepsister, Shelby. She's... Another pause, a tilt of the head, a performative little smile. Just a nurse, she said, just the way you'd say only, like an apology for something that couldn't be helped. Then quickly, anyway, my father laughed. A real, full laugh, the kind you give when a joke lands exactly right. Diane smirked, one corner of her mouth lifting in satisfaction, like a box had been checked. A few guests laughed along, not out of cruelty, just reflex. When the bride laughs, the room follows. 120 people looked at me for 3 seconds. Then the conversation resumed, and I dissolved back into the wallpaper. I sat with my hands folded under the table, fingers pressed into my palms so hard I'd find half-moon marks later. I didn't cry. I didn't stand. I didn't leave. But I noticed something. At the head table, one person wasn't laughing. Richard Harrington. He was staring at me. His champagne glass was untouched. He leaned toward Margaret and said something I couldn't hear. Then he turned to James, and I saw his lips move around 5 words. That girl. I've seen her before. Victoria's toast came 30 minutes later. She held the crystal mic like a scepter, backlit by the chandeliers, her silhouette cut against a wall of white roses. I want to tell a story about family, she said, smiling at the room. Growing up, my little stepsister always wanted to help people. She'd bandage the dog. She'd make ice packs for scraped knees. Polite laughter. I guess she eventually found her level. The room chuckled. Robert raised his glass. Diane touched her collarbone and smiled with her eyes closed, as if savoring music. I sat at table 14 with my hands wrapped around a water glass. The babysitter beside me, a college sophomore named Grace, glanced at me sideways with the expression people wear when they know they're witnessing something ugly and don't want to get involved. After the toast, a woman from Victoria's side approached my table. Blonde, mid-40s, cocktail rings on 3 fingers. So you're the stepsister. What do you do, like empty bedpans? She laughed at her own joke before I could respond. I looked at her. Among other things, last Tuesday, I assisted in an emergency thoracotomy. We cracked a man's chest open in the trauma bay and repaired a lacerated ventricle. He lived. The woman's smile collapsed. She opened her mouth, found nothing, and excused herself. Victoria materialized within seconds. Shelby, don't bore people with work stories. I said nothing. I didn't need to. The silence after the word lived had done the work for me. But across the room, I noticed something shift. James, standing near the bar, was watching his fiancée with an expression I'd never seen on him before. A faint crease between his eyebrows, the beginning of a question he didn't know how to ask yet. Victoria cornered me in the powder room an hour later. White marble countertops, Aesop soap dispensers, monogrammed linen towels folded into fans. She closed the door behind her and the sound was very final. Listen to me. Her voice was flat and clean, stripped of the performance she wore in public. Tomorrow is my wedding. My wedding. You will sit. You will smile. You will say nothing. Don't talk to the Harringtons. Don't talk about your job. Don't talk. Period. I met her eyes in the gold-framed mirror. Why did you tell them I have mental health issues, Victoria? She didn't flinch, didn't deny it. I told them what they needed to hear. You lied about me. I managed the narrative. You think the Harringtons would accept this family as is? A hardware store manager and a nurse? She said nurse, the way someone might say rash. I'm building something here. This wedding is the most important day of my life. Don't destroy it. You're asking me to pretend I don't exist. I'm asking you to know your place. Know your place. 3 words. The same 3 words my family had been telling me in different ways for 20 years. Through empty chairs and misspelled names and borrowed suits and photo crops. Victoria was just the first one to say them out loud. The door opened. Diane's face appeared, smooth and alert. Everything okay in here? Just sister stuff, Victoria said lightly. She smoothed her dress, adjusted her David Yurman bracelet, borrowed, I happen to know, from a client. Diane smiled and closed the door, sealing the conversation like a letter she'd co-signed. I stood in that powder room, surrounded by marble and monograms, in a space that cost more than my monthly rent. And I made a decision. I didn't know what shape it would take. I only knew that tomorrow, for the first time, I was not going to be silent. I left the rehearsal dinner early. No one noticed. I sat in my Civic in the Oakmont Country Club parking lot, wedged between a Porsche Macan and a black Range Rover, with the engine off and my hands on the wheel. The keychain charm that said RN, a gift from the ER team after my first year, caught the streetlight and threw a tiny reflection onto the dashboard. I could drive home. I could skip the wedding. I could let Victoria have her perfect day and go back to the ER, where people actually needed me, where my name was spelled correctly on every chart I signed. Nobody in that ballroom would miss me. That was the entire point of Table 14. I called Dr. Ellen Marsh. She picked up on the second ring. She always did, even off shift, because that's who Ellen was. "They called you just a nurse?" Her voice was steady, the way a scalpel is steady. "Shelby, you've saved more lives in 1 year than most people do in a lifetime. Don't let anyone shrink you." I looked through the ballroom's floor-to-ceiling windows. Inside, the party continued without a single person missing me. And then I saw Richard Harrington. He was standing alone at the bar, a glass in his hand, staring out through the same window I was looking through. For a moment, our eyes met across the glass and the parking lot and the distance between what I was and what they thought I was. Then my phone buzzed, a text from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Margaret Harrington. I got your number from the guest list. I just wanted to say, I'm glad you're here tomorrow. Richard was asking about you." I read it 3 times. I didn't understand why she'd sent it. I wouldn't understand until tomorrow. But something in that message, something in the way she'd written "Richard was asking about you," told me to stay. I started the engine, but I drove toward home, not away from tomorrow. You know, sitting in that parking lot, I almost drove away. I almost let Victoria win, again. And I think a lot of you know that feeling, that moment when your hand is on the steering wheel and you're asking yourself, is it worth it? If you've ever stayed when everything in you wanted to leave, tell me in the comments, what made you stay? And if this story is pulling you in, hit subscribe. The part that changed everything is coming. The wedding was held on the Harrington estate. 200 guests. Flower arrangements flown in from the Netherlands. Peonies, garden roses, trailing jasmine. Victoria wore a ream acra bridal gown that caught the September light and turned it into something holy. A string orchestra played during the ceremony. A jazz band warmed up behind the tent for the reception. The whole thing looked like it had been art-directed. I arrived early because I didn't trust myself to arrive at all. Victoria intercepted me in the driveway. "Why are you early? Stay out of photos until I call you." She called me once, for the full family shot. The photographer positioned me at the far edge, behind Diane's shoulder. I'd see the photo later. My face was cropped out of every version Victoria posted. At the reception, I found my seat. Table 18, near the service entrance. 2 of the chairs at my table were empty, guests who hadn't shown. The tablecloth was slightly wrinkled. The centerpiece had fewer stems than the others. I'd been placed as close to invisible as geometry allowed, but then Richard Harrington appeared. He was working the room, table by table, shaking hands and thanking people for coming. When he reached table 18, he didn't shake my hand. He pulled out a chair and sat down. "You know," he said, turning his glass slowly, 3 years ago, I almost died on I-95. A truck hit my car head-on. I was pinned. And for 47 minutes, before any ambulance arrived, 1 person kept me alive." He told me about the rain, the broken glass, the woman who crawled through the wreckage and held his head still. She talked to me so I wouldn't lose consciousness. The paramedic said if she hadn't been there, I'd be in a box, not at this wedding. My heart was hammering, but I still didn't make the connection. 3 years, hundreds of patients, faces blur. He looked at me. "I'm sorry. You remind me of someone." Then someone called his name from across the tent, and he stood, squeezed my shoulder, and walked away. Victoria's reception speech was her masterpiece. She stood at the center of the dance floor, a wireless mic in one hand, Her other hand pressed to her heart, and she thanked every person who had ever made her feel like she mattered. Diane. My rock, my compass, my first best friend. Robert. My hero, the man who showed me what a real father looks like. Her bridesmaids, her college roommate, her boss, James's groomsmen, the Harringtons. My new family, the people I've been waiting my whole life to find. She thanked the florist, the caterer, the string quartet. She thanked the venue coordinator by first and last name. She did not say my name. Not once. Not even in passing. 200 people applauded. Diane nodded with the satisfaction of someone watching a plan execute flawlessly. Robert raised his glass. No one noticed the omission because you can only notice someone missing if you knew they were supposed to be there. I sat at table 18 with 2 empty chairs and a centerpiece that was already wilting, and I listened to my sister thank every person in her orbit except me. James leaned toward Victoria afterward. You didn't mention Shelby. Victoria touched his cheek. She prefers it that way. Trust me. I went to the restroom, locked the stall, looked at myself in the mirror. My mother's pearl earrings catching the vanity light, my eyes dry, my face completely still. I touched the earrings. Mom would have called my name. Mom would have called it first. The door opened. Margaret Harrington walked in. She saw me. She didn't pretend she hadn't. I noticed you weren't mentioned, she said quietly. Are you okay? I'm used to it. Margaret held my gaze. No one should be used to that. I found my father on the patio, leaning against the stone railing with a glass of Macallan 25, poured from the Harringtons' private bar, paid for by the Harringtons' money, held in the Harringtons' crystal. Dad. He turned. There was a flash of something in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or the faint discomfort of a man who knows he's about to be asked a question he can't deflect. She didn't say my name, in front of 200 people. Robert exhaled through his nose. Shelby, don't do this tonight. It's Victoria's day. When is it my day, Dad? When has it ever been my day? You're being dramatic. This is exactly what Victoria says about... He stopped. About what? That I'm unstable? That I have issues? You told them that too, didn't you? He looked away, down at the garden, at the fairy lights wrapped around the boxwood, at anything that wasn't me. That was his answer. It was always his answer. The look away, the silence, the retreat into some private distance where he didn't have to account for the daughter he'd stopped parenting 2 decades ago. I'm done, I said. He flinched. Not done with this wedding. Done waiting for you to see me. I turned and walked back toward the ballroom. He didn't call after me. He didn't follow. He stood on the patio in his borrowed suit, drinking borrowed scotch, and let me go the way he'd let me go every day since he married Diane. The worst pain wasn't being erased by my sister. It was watching my father choose to help her do it. I pushed through the ballroom doors and stopped. Richard Harrington was at the bar, alone, looking at his phone. On the screen, I could see it from where I stood, was a newspaper article. Old, yellowed, and he was staring at it with the kind of focus that precedes recognition. He looked up, looked at me, set the phone down, and started walking toward me. He stopped 2 feet in front of me. His phone was still in his hand, the screen still lit. I could see the article's headline at an angle. Local businessman survives horrific highway crash. The same article that hung framed in his study. Excuse me. His voice was careful, controlled, the way someone speaks when they're holding something fragile. Can I ask you something? Where did you work 3 years ago? St. Luke's Regional, I said. I still do. The ER. It wasn't a question. Yes. Were you on I-95 that night, November 14th? And there it was. The date, the highway, the night that had lived in my body for 3 years, in my hands, in my shoulders, in the way I still flinch when I hear tires lock on wet pavement. Yes, I said. My voice cracked for the first time all night. Richard stood very still, His eyes filled slowly, the way water rises in a basin. Not sudden, not dramatic, just steady and certain. "It's you," he said. "Mr. Harrington, You held my head for 47 minutes, in the rain. You talked to me so I wouldn't lose consciousness. You told me about your mother's pearl earrings, that she wore them every day, so I'd have something to focus on while I couldn't feel my legs." My hand went to my ear. The pearl stud. Mom's pearl stud. The one I'd been wearing that night on the highway. The one I'd described to a bleeding, trapped stranger to keep him anchored to something gentle while the sirens were still miles away. Richard's gaze dropped to the earring. His jaw tightened, and his voice broke open. "It is you." Then Victoria's voice crackled through the speakers. "Attention, everyone! Time for the father-daughter dance!" Richard had to go, but he took my hand, both of his hands around both of mine, and said, "Don't leave. Please, I have something to say tonight." For 3 years, he'd been looking for me, and I'd been here, in his son's family, sitting at table 18. The father-daughter dance played out under a canopy of fairy lights. Victoria and Robert moved across the floor to "What a Wonderful World," and the room sighed on cue. Victoria rested her head on Robert's shoulder and smiled for the photographer. It was a beautiful image. It was always a beautiful image with Victoria. I stood near the edge of the tent and watched Richard disappear through a side door. He was gone for 12 minutes. I counted. What I learned later, what Richard told me himself, was this. He walked to the far end of the garden, took out his phone, and called St. Luke's Regional Medical Center. The night operator connected him to the ER. Dr. Ellen Marsh was on call. "I'm looking for records of a trauma nurse named Shelby Ittner," Richard said. "She was involved in a multi-vehicle accident on I-95, November 14th, 3 years ago. The patient was Richard Harrington." There was a pause. Then Ellen's voice, steady as always. "Shelby was the lead nurse on scene that night. She stabilized you for 47 minutes before EMS arrived. She received a formal commendation from the hospital. Mr. Harrington, honestly, she saved your life. Can you email me the commendation letter? I can send it right now." 3 minutes later, Richard's phone buzzed. The email arrived from St. Luke's office of the chief nursing officer. Attached, a formal commendation letter signed by the chief of surgery and the hospital director. It described the incident in clinical, precise language. Shelby Ittner, RN, BSN, demonstrated extraordinary poise under extreme conditions, stabilizing a critically injured patient with suspected cervical spine trauma using manual inline stabilization for 47 minutes in adverse weather. Richard read it twice, closed the email, called Margaret. "I need the mic after the toasts," he said. "I have an announcement." Margaret paused. "What kind of announcement?" "The kind this family needs to hear." I went back to table 18. The dance floor was full now. Victoria was glowing, spinning with James, then with Robert, then with a groomsman. The room orbited around her. Diane was photographing everything, curating the night in real time. I sat alone with the empty chairs and the thinning centerpiece and my reflection in the blade of a dinner knife. The pearl earrings looked back at me, 2 small points of light in all that dark. Then Margaret Harrington sat down beside me. She didn't announce herself, didn't make a scene. She simply pulled out the chair next to mine at the worst table in the room, placed her clutch on the tablecloth, and settled in like she'd chosen this seat on purpose. Her Loro Piana shawl draped across the back of the chair, understated, expensive, quiet in the way true wealth is quiet. We sat in silence for a while. Then she spoke. "Richard told me about the highway." I looked at her. "He remembers more than I expected. He remembers everything. He talks about that nurse every Thanksgiving, every single one." She folded her hands. "You saved the most important person in my life, and you never once came forward." "I didn't do it for recognition, Mrs. Harrington. I did it because I was there and I knew what to do." "I know," she said. That's exactly why you deserve it. A pause. The jazz band shifted into something slower. What's he going to do? I asked. Margaret looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen directed at me in a very long time, something close to maternal protection. What he should have done if he'd found you sooner. She reached over and covered my hand with hers. And I let her. Because for the first time that night, someone was sitting with me who wanted to be there. Margaret Harrington, a woman who owns more than most people will ever see, chose to sit at my empty table. And in that moment, I understood something. Respect has nothing to do with where they seat you. It's about who chooses to sit with you. Now, the next part of this story. I still get chills telling it. If you want to hear what Richard said to that room full of people, make sure you're subscribed and keep watching. The toasts ended, the jazz band lowered their instruments, the MC stepped forward, adjusted his lapel mic, and smiled. Ladies and gentlemen, the father of the groom would like to say a few words. Applause. 200 chairs shifted as people turned toward the stage. Richard Harrington stepped into the spotlight looking like a man who had been waiting 3 years for this exact moment. Victoria, standing near the cake table, beamed. She adjusted a strand of hair and leaned into James. This was the part of the night she'd choreographed. The Harrington patriarch praising his new daughter-in-law, welcoming her into the family, sealing the image. Richard gripped the mic and didn't smile. Most of you know, he began, his voice carrying through the tent with the weight of someone accustomed to rooms listening, that 3 years ago, I was in a serious accident. An 18-wheeler jackknifed on I-95 during a rainstorm. It struck my car head-on. My door was crushed inward. My legs were pinned. The steering column was against my chest. The room went still. Even the caterers paused. For 47 minutes, before any ambulance, before any paramedic, before any rescue tool could reach me, one person kept me alive. A woman. She crawled through the wreckage, held my head and neck still so my spine wouldn't sever, and talked to me through the worst 47 minutes of my life. He paused, looked at the room. Victoria was still smiling, but her smile had stiffened. She wasn't sure where this was going. I never found her, Richard continued. The hospital wouldn't release her name. Privacy regulations. I searched. I hired people to search. I set up a foundation in her honor. For 3 years, I called her the Angel on I-95. He took a breath. Tonight, I found her. The room didn't breathe. Richard turned and looked directly at table 18. The woman who saved my life, Richard said, is sitting right here, at table 18. 200 heads turned. 200 pairs of eyes landed on me. The girl in the navy dress at the worst table, the one with the thinning centerpiece and 2 empty chairs. Her name is Shelby Ittner. Silence. Absolute physical silence, the kind where you can hear the ice melting in the glasses. Richard's voice didn't waver. 20 minutes ago, the woman standing next to me on this stage introduced Shelby as just a nurse. He turned slowly toward Victoria. Her smile was gone. Her face had gone the color of the tablecloths. Let me tell you what just a nurse means, Richard said, and his voice dropped into something low and unbreakable. It means kneeling in broken glass in the rain at 11 o'clock at night. It means holding a stranger's head still for 47 minutes so his cervical spine doesn't sever. It means talking about your mother's pearl earrings, the ones she's wearing right now, to keep a dying man conscious when there's nothing else left to hold on to. He held up his phone. The screen faced the audience, the email from St. Luke's, the commendation letter, the hospital seal. This is from St. Luke's Medical Center, a formal commendation signed by the chief of surgery and the hospital director. It says Shelby Ittner demonstrated extraordinary poise under extreme conditions, that she was solely responsible for stabilizing me until the paramedics arrived. Someone at a middle table started clapping, then another, then a wave, rising from the back, sweeping forward, until nearly every person in the tent was standing. Victoria stood frozen on the stage. Robert had set his glass down and was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen from him. Something between shame and awe, like he was looking at a stranger he should have known. James turned to Victoria. His voice was quiet, but in the silence, it carried. "You told me she had mental health issues. You lied to me." The standing ovation collapsed into a held breath. Every eye was on Victoria. James stood 3 feet from her, arms at his sides. "Did you tell the Harringtons Shelby was mentally unstable?" Victoria's hands fluttered to her necklace, a nervous gesture I recognized from childhood, the one she deployed when a lie was about to meet daylight. "James, this isn't the time. Answer me." The tent was a courtroom, 200 witnesses, no objections. Victoria tried to smile. It came out wrong, too wide, too bright, the social reflex of a woman who'd spent her entire life performing. "I was just trying to keep things simple." Margaret Harrington rose from table 18. Her voice was calm, cultured, and utterly devastating. "Simple? You lied to our family about the woman who saved my husband's life. You fabricated a mental health condition so you could hide her at the back of the room." Robert took half a step forward. "Let's not blow this out of proportion." Richard cut him off without raising his voice. "Robert, with respect, your daughter fabricated a story about your other daughter's mental health to manipulate my family. That's not a proportion issue. That's a character issue." Victoria's eyes went wet. Tears spilled. Practiced. Fast. The kind that appear on command. Diane moved toward her, reaching out, but Victoria pushed her mother's hand away, and her voice cracked into something raw. "This is her fault," she said, pointing at me. "She should have stayed invisible." A gasp moved through the room like wind through curtains. 200 people heard it. The babysitter at my table, the caterers near the kitchen. James. Richard. My father. She should have stayed invisible. Nobody coached her to say that. Nobody scripted it. And that made it the most honest thing Victoria had said all night. Richard reclaimed the mic. The room was still ringing with Victoria's outburst, but he stood at the center of it like a man who had weathered worse than a wedding gone sideways. "I didn't plan to do this tonight," he said. His voice was rough at the edges now, the way voices get when emotion has been held down and is finally permitted to rise. "But I think the timing couldn't be more right." He straightened, looked at the room. 3 years ago, after the accident, I established the Harrington Foundation First Responder Scholarship, $200,000 annually for nurses and EMTs who demonstrate exceptional dedication in the field. Murmurs rippled through the tent. I've spent 3 years looking for the right person to receive the inaugural award. I looked across the state, across the country, reviewed dozens of nominations. He shook his head slowly. And she was here, at table 18, in a $39 dress. He stepped down from the stage. The spotlight followed him, the same light that had been illuminating Victoria's $12,000 ream ochre gown, now tracking a 63-year-old man walking toward the back of the room. He stopped at my table, extended his hand. "Shelby Ittner, on behalf of the Harrington Foundation, I'd like to officially invite you as the first recipient of this scholarship. It will fund advanced trauma nursing certification, continuing education, and anything you need to keep doing what you do." I stood. My legs were unsteady, but my eyes were dry. I took his hand. The room stood with me, 200 people. A standing ovation that shook the tent poles. Richard leaned in and said quietly, "Just for me. Thank you for my life." Behind us, Victoria remained on the stage, alone, under the spotlight that no longer belonged to her. Her wedding, her guests, her stage. And the only story anyone would remember from this night was the one she'd tried to erase. I didn't save Mr. Harrington for recognition. I saved him because that's what nurses do. But I won't pretend it doesn't matter that someone finally saw it. James took Victoria by the arm and walked her through the glass doors to the terrace. He didn't pull. He didn't raise his voice. But his hand was firm, and Victoria went because, for the first time in their relationship, she didn't have a script for what was happening. Through the glass, the guests could see their silhouettes. Victoria's arms crossed, James's hands in his pockets, then out, then running through his hair. The body language of a man recalibrating everything he thought he knew. Fragments of the conversation drifted through the cracked door. "You told my parents she was unstable," James said. "You had me believing my own wife's stepsister was someone to pity. What else have you lied about?" "Everything I did was for us, James, for our image." "Our image? I married you because I thought you were kind. My father almost died, and the person who saved him was sitting in the back of our wedding because you put her there. She's nobody. She's the reason my father walked me down the aisle today. She is somebody." Silence. Then James's voice, lower now but still carrying. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize to Shelby. Not later. Tonight. In front of the people who watched you humiliate her. James? And Monday morning we're calling a marriage counselor. We start next week. You can't be serious. If I find out you've lied about anything else, anything at all, we're done." Through the glass I watched Victoria's posture change. The confident architecture of her spine softened into something I'd never seen from her. Uncertainty. She stood on the other side of the glass, in her $12,000 gown, and for the first time, the armor wasn't holding. I didn't seek my father out. He found me. I was on the balcony at the far side of the estate, away from the noise, looking out at the garden where fairy lights made everything look like a promise. The night air had cooled, and I could feel it on my bare arms, and I didn't mind because at least it was honest. "Shelby." I turned. Robert stood in the doorway, his borrowed suit wrinkled, his face wrecked. He looked like a man who had just watched something collapse and realized he'd been standing on it. "I didn't know," he said. "About the highway, about Richard." "No," I said. "You didn't, because you never asked. You never asked what happened at work. You never asked if I was okay. You never asked anything. I thought I was keeping the peace. You were keeping Victoria happy. That's not the same thing." He tried to speak, and the words dissolved before they reached his mouth. Then he cried. My 58-year-old father, standing on a billionaire's balcony in a suit his stepdaughter bought him, crying like he'd just realized the house was already on fire when he stopped checking the smoke detectors. I didn't hug him. I stood where I was. "I don't hate you, Dad. I just stopped expecting you to be my father a long time ago. Can I fix this? I don't know. But you can't fix it by crying at Victoria's wedding and going back to normal on Monday." He wiped his face with the back of his hand. "Victoria told me that you'd be happier if we kept distance, and I believed her, because it was easier." There it was. 20 years of abdication, summarized in one sentence. He hadn't been deceived. He'd volunteered. "I don't need your tears, Dad. I need you to remember this feeling on a regular Tuesday when Victoria asks you to pretend I don't exist again." He nodded. I walked back inside. Victoria came back into the ballroom 15 minutes later. Her makeup had been touched up, but her eyes were red underneath the concealer, and her posture carried the stiffness of a woman who had just been given an ultimatum by the man she married 3 hours ago. James walked beside her, not touching her. Present, but separate. She took the mic. The third time that night. The first time she'd introduced her family. The second time, she'd given her toast. This time, the room knew what was coming, and the silence was a different species of quiet. Expectant. Judicial. "I owe someone an apology tonight." Her voice was thin. She scanned the room as if searching for an exit strategy. Found none. "Shelby. I shouldn't have introduced you the way I did. I'm sorry." She stopped. The room waited. You could hear the ice. Margaret spoke from her chair. Her voice was polite, precise, and relentless. "And the lies about her mental health?" Victoria's composure cracked. A visible fracture, like a hairline in porcelain. I told the Harringtons things about Shelby that weren't true. I'm sorry for that too." The apology landed in the tent like a coin dropped in a cathedral, small, hard, echoing. It wasn't enough, and everyone knew it, but it was what one night could extract. I didn't go to the stage, I didn't hug her, I didn't say, "I forgive you," because forgiveness isn't a reflex, it's a decision that deserves time. I met her eyes across the room and nodded once. That was all. James leaned into the mic. "Shelby, my family owes you more than an apology, and we intend to show it." Victoria stood beside her new husband, hearing her own wedding rewritten in real time, and for the first time in her life, she had no control over the story. She apologized with the same mic she'd used to humiliate me. I didn't need to hear her say she was sorry. I needed her to hear herself say it. The reception continued, because weddings have momentum even when the ground shifts beneath them. The jazz band played, guests danced, cake was cut, but the energy in the room had turned, not sour exactly, but honest. People spoke more quietly. Laughter came in smaller doses. Richard found me in the garden, sitting on a stone bench near the magnolia tree, where the ceremony had taken place hours earlier. The chairs had already been cleared. The aisle runner was gone. It was just grass and lanterns now. He sat beside me and reached into his jacket. "I want to show you something." From his wallet, weathered brown leather cracked at the folds, he pulled a small, creased piece of paper. He unfolded it carefully, the way you handle something you've carried too long to treat roughly. It was a printout, medical records, and at the top, in clinical typeface, "Lead Nurse S. Ittner." "I've carried your name in my wallet every day for 3 years," he said. "I didn't know your face, I didn't know your voice, but I knew your name, and I knew that I was alive because of it." I looked at the paper, worn soft at the creases, the ink fading. He hadn't just saved it, he'd lived with it. "When that woman said 'just a nurse' tonight," he continued, "I wanted to stand up right there. I wanted to turn the whole room upside down, but I needed to be sure first." "Why does it matter to you?" I asked. "After 3 years." He looked at me with the absolute clarity of a man who had been given a second life and had spent every day of it trying to earn it. "Because no one gets to reduce the person who saved my life to a punchline." He handed me a business card. Harrington Foundation. A phone number. A name. "This is real. The scholarship is real. Call this number Monday. And Shelby, if you ever need anything. Anything at all." I took the card, and I held the worn piece of paper with my name on it, and I let 3 years of silence mean something. A week later, the dust settled into something measurable. The Harrington Foundation called on Monday morning, 9 a.m. sharp. A woman named Claire from the grants office walked me through the details. $200,000, designated for advanced trauma nursing certification through Johns Hopkins, plus continuing education credits, plus a stipend for conference travel. The paperwork would take 2 weeks. The announcement would go on the foundation's website. My name, spelled correctly, would be listed as the inaugural recipient. I signed the forms at my kitchen table, in scrubs, before a 12-hour shift. Victoria and James began marriage counseling that same week. I heard through Robert, who had suddenly developed the capacity for phone calls, that the Harringtons had put conditions on the house they'd planned to help the couple purchase. No financial support until 6 months of counseling were completed. Victoria's social circle contracted like a fist. Friends of the Harringtons, the people who actually mattered in the world Victoria was trying to enter, stopped returning her calls. Her wedding photos on Instagram went from 800 likes to barely 100. The comments section, once a parade of heart emojis, went quiet. Robert sent me a letter. Not a text, not an email. A handwritten letter, on lined paper torn from a yellow legal pad, in handwriting I barely recognized because I'd never seen it before. He wrote about regret. He wrote about the things he should have said at my graduation, at my nursing school pinning ceremony, at every dinner table where he'd let someone else narrate my life. He wrote that he was sorry. I read it. I folded it. I put it in my nightstand drawer. I didn't write back. Not because I was punishing him, because some apologies need to sit before you know whether they're seeds or just words. Diane didn't call, didn't text. That was Diane. When there was nothing left to gain, she disappeared, consistent to the end. Victoria's apology cost her nothing that night. The real cost came after, when the people she'd been performing for stopped watching. I went back to work the Monday after the wedding, and the ER didn't care about anything that had happened in a tent full of champagne and fairy lights. A construction worker came in with rebar through his forearm. A teenager overdosed in the ambulance bay. A grandmother coded in room 4, and we brought her back. Dr. Ellen Marsh caught me in the hallway between traumas. She leaned against the wall with her arms crossed and her reading glasses pushed into her hair. Richard Harrington called the hospital again this morning, she said. Wanted to thank the nursing staff personally. He specifically mentioned you. She paused. He said you're a hero. I'm a nurse, I said. That's more than enough. Ellen smiled, the rare, unguarded kind she saves for moments she means. Yeah, it is. I didn't tell my colleagues the full story. I didn't post about it. The same way I'd never posted about the Nursing Excellence Award or the thoracotomy save or any of the hundreds of moments that made me who I am. My work lives where it matters, in the charts, in the outcomes, in the patients who walk out the doors they were carried through. But something had shifted, not in the world, in me. I touched my mother's pearl earrings in the locker room mirror before my shift. They'd always been a reminder of what I'd lost. Now they were something else, a thread that connected every version of me. The 7-year-old who lost her mom, the teenager who disappeared into her father's new family, the 26-year-old who knelt on broken glass in the rain and held a stranger's life in her hands, the 29-year-old who sat at table 18 and refused to leave. I didn't plan any of this. I didn't scheme or strategize. I just lived my life, did my job, and eventually, the truth caught up. The revenge wasn't what Richard said on that stage. The revenge was 20 years of becoming someone Victoria could never diminish, no matter how hard she tried. Real strength isn't loud. It's the 47 minutes in the rain when nobody's watching. If you're sitting at table 18 in your own family, if someone has told you that your work, your life, your contribution is just anything, I want you to hear this. You are not your family's opinion of you. You are not the worst table at the party. You are what you do when no one's clapping. Last week, I received a card in the mail. Handwritten, cream-colored stationery, thick and heavy the way real paper feels, from Richard Harrington. It was a Thanksgiving invitation. Our table seats 12, he'd written. There's a chair with your name on it, spelled correctly. It was the first time in years someone had invited me to a table where I wasn't an afterthought. I pinned the card to my refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a stethoscope. It sits next to my work schedule and a photo of my mother, the one where she's laughing with her head thrown back, pearl earrings catching the light. I don't know what happens next with my father. I don't know if Victoria will change or just learn to hide the parts of herself that got exposed. I don't know if Diane will ever pick up the phone. But I know this. I'm not waiting for any of them anymore. This morning, I clipped my badge to my scrubs. S. Ittner, RN, BSN. I put in my mother's pearl earrings. I drove my Civic to the hospital. I walked into the ER, and the charge nurse handed me 3 charts before I'd poured my coffee. My mother used to say, "Help people, and the right people will find you." It took 29 years, but she was right. My name is Shelby Ittner. I'm just a nurse. And that's the most powerful thing I've ever been. That's my story. And I know it's long, but if you made it this far, it means something and it spoke to you. So here's what I want to ask. Do you think Victoria will really change? Or do people like her just learn to hide it better? Drop your answer in the comments. Change or hide. I read every single one. If this story made you feel something, give it a like. It helps more people hear it. And if you want more stories like this, check the description for a playlist that'll keep you going. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourselves. And remember, you are more than what they call you.